समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा?
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
As we draw to the close of 2025, has the Air India 171 crash become the forgotten tragedy of this year? Well, not if a few good men and women have their way. The Supreme Court is already hearing two different petitions, including one by Commander Sumit Sabharwal's aging father and another by the head of the Safety Matters Foundation, demanding a new independent judicial court-monitored probe into what caused the crash. In the meantime, senior pilots and aviation experts have now looked at what they're calling the final 12 seconds of the ill-fated flight. On the program today, in a Mojo exclusive, we'll be joined by two experts, including by a top pilot, who will take us through what they believe happened in the final 12 seconds before the aircraft went down. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, we're still looking for answers as to why Air India 171 crashed seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad as it was headed towards London. The interim probe panel report has been widely criticized for resorting to innuendo and half-released information, including an absence of timestamps for some critical references, including exactly when the rat of the plane deployed. Now, we have two different petitions before the Supreme Court, including one filed by the 91-year-old father of Captain Sumit Sabharwal. Captain Sumit Sabharwal's father spoke to me, you can see that in those images, breaking down through tears, talking about the final words of Captain Sumit Sabharwal as or right before he took off. Words that should be critical testimony in any investigation because they certainly run counter to the suicide theory that has been promoted in certain quarters. A suicide theory that Captain Sabharwal's father said hurt him like hell. A theory he then decided to take on in court. In the meantime, we have different theories being looked at as to what may have caused the crash. The pilot community is appalled that in the absence of any concrete evidence, the fact that the plane could have had an electrical fault was not even looked at. And instead, there was lazy armchair criticism of the pilots without any substantiated evidence, at least not so far. Now we have experts looking at what they're calling the final 12 seconds of the ill-fated flight. I want to welcome our two guests on the program today as we take you inside the last 12 seconds of this tragedy. Captain Amit Singh is with us. He's, of course, been a senior pilot. He's today the founder of the Safety Matters Foundation, and he's one of those who has actually filed a petition before the Supreme Court. These petitions will hopefully get their next hearing, Amit, in January. But it's important to remind our audience that the Supreme Court has already said that the entire country is inclined to not blame the pilot in the way that sections of the Western media have done. And I also want to welcome to the program Rachel Chitra. She's an independent journalist. She has been writing and reporting relentlessly for the last few months since the Air India 171 crash took place. Really classical, old-fashioned beat reporter committing herself to pursuing the truth of this tragedy. So thank you both for joining us. Captain Amit Singh, I'm going to start with you. You have given us access to a report that you have prepared. And this is very important because one of your petitions is before the Supreme Court, where you actually talk about what you believe were the final 12 seconds. And in effect, what you're actually saying is that the plane was speaking. Now, I'm using, of course, layperson's language. When I say that there was a last message or a last set of messages from the plane, I don't actually mean it literally. We're talking about the ACARS system. We're talking about the kind of signals that were coming from the plane that could have or would have given some indication of what was going on with the aircraft. And as we look at what you have called the final 12 seconds, I want you to very slowly and, if possible, very simply take our audience through what you're trying to say here.
So here, the whole narrative about the pilots uh, controlling the fuel control switches or operating the fuel control switches has been blown to smithers, basically because of technical evidence which has been produced. Now, this tech evidence is in the form of, we call it ACARS messages, digital messages passed by the aircraft to the ground station and back from the ground station to the aircraft. The new evidence which has come forth basically tells us the final 12 seconds. 1 second before the aircraft got airborne at 38, there was a message which went from the aircraft to the ground station that there is a fault in the aircraft. That is an automated message which goes, and there is no human intervention in that. Neither is the pilot aware, nor is any other person in the aircraft aware. So that goes to the Air India Operations Center. If it is a serious fault, it goes to the Boeing Center, which is in US, and they are monitoring all fault messages serious enough to be responded immediately. So at 39, the aircraft gets airborne. So 1 second later, the ground station in US basically responds that they have received a message from the aircraft and they need more information. So they query the aircraft basically. But after that, the aircraft stops responding. And what the ground station gets a feedback is no acknowledgement from the aircraft, which means that there is an electrical problem in the aircraft and the communication system has gone down. Now, a couple of seconds later, again, the messages go back and forth, no acknowledgement. And finally, the operations center in Air India, based in Delhi, does a manual intervention. So they send a manual message, uh, Captain, confirm all operations normal. So that is a manual message to confirm that the aircraft is receiving messages. And that also goes unanswered. So this trail of messages kind of proves that just after getting airborne and before what we call the fuel control switches were operated, well before there was a serious cascading electrical malfunction, which in all probability was the root cause of the accident.
So, first, before we understand what this cascading malfunction may have been, Amit, I want to understand what, in very simple terms, and forgive me if this seems somewhat less than intelligent to you, because I want to understand this for people who are not aviation geeks. When you say a message, we are not talking about words, we are not talking about text, we are talking about signals. Could you just explain that a little bit more to people who don't understand it?
So there are certain signals. The aircraft is completely computerized, digitized, and it is automated to send certain faults to the ground station so that they understand what's happening inside the tech part of the aircraft. So these are digital signals uh, which go through various communication channels like the satellites or the direct VHF, what we call uh, very high frequency channels. So those are used to basically tell the health of the aircraft. So at all times, the engines and other operational parts are monitored. The health of the aircraft is monitored by both Air India and critical systems by Boeing. So these messages go back and forth,
And
and
these are
there is a
automated,
capability.
and these are automated. The aircraft is like a big computer in the sky, and the aircraft is designed to send automated signals, which is the language in which the aircraft is communicating both to Boeing and Air India in this case.
So
Yes.
these are coded messages, short form, uh, in 3 letters or 4 letters, which are sent to Air India and Boeing, and they have their own repository from which they decode these messages. So we have, like in the visuals, we have shown MAS and ENG. So these are basically certain messages which can be decoded only by Boeing, certain can be decoded by both Air India and Boeing. So these are short forms of certain faults or certain events which are happening on the aircraft.
Okay, I'm going to let you fix that beeping sound behind you, and in the meantime, get to Rachel, because I want to, with Captain Amit, understand, what each of these references means. What I've understood is that these are coded messages, they're digital messages, Rachel, but there is a kind of language that the aircraft is speaking in its final moments, in its final 12 seconds, that are now accessible and available pretty much to everybody. And when you look at the way Captain Amit Singh has broken down those final 12 seconds, and we can go back to those graphics, Rachel, what is the message that emerges for you as somebody who's been following this issue so closely?
So the thing is, to first understand these 12 seconds, I think we need to go to what happened 15 minutes before takeoff. And 15 minutes before takeoff, this plane had no-go faults. And the thing is, even one no-go fault, if the plane had, it should stop. Like, it cannot fly. Like, under regulations, it is not permitted to fly because these are serious faults. And this plane did not have one, but had 6 no-go faults. So the first no-go fault is the bus power control units. So they are like the traffic police for like the power supply. Like, they control the highways, because many people think the AI 171, they think of the engines as just providing propulsion, like thrust, like it's moving forward, but the engines also serve another purpose on this plane, which is providing electricity for the plane. And so the left engine and the right engine, they have these 2 power lines, which is L1 L2 and R1 R2, and these are being controlled by the bus power control units. So even if one of these BPCUs, and remember, like Amit told, like they would send it in codes. So this code was BPCU. So the BPCU had faults, and not just one, both the left and right, meaning both left and right engines, they were falling out of sync, which means that the whole system could.
And how can we tell that? And how can we tell that from the ACARS messages that the 2 engines were not in sync, Rachel?
The 2 power control units had failed. And these power control units that are responsible for power stability on the plane are part of the core network. So this goes back to when June 9th, which is 3 days before the crash, when Air India, in good faith probably, marked the core network failure, and this is present in the AIB report. They say this core network is a medium risk failure. And this is something very similar to the Lion Air tragedy, because in the Lion Air tragedy, this MCAS system, they did not inform pilots. Like the MCAS, the software that resulted in the crash. So they did not inform pilots. They did not inform anyone as to how this software works. So similarly, the operations note that Boeing has sent, and this is through internal Boeing documents, the Boeing, what it informed Air India was that only small minor functions like flight deck printer, video surveillance, all these things will be rendered inoperative. It did not tell Air India that this is the system, the core network is the one that's talking to FedEx, which is the engine computer. And why it's very serious is FedEx is the one that can command fuel cutoff.
Okay, I'm going to try and request Captain Amit to break this down into even simpler language. I know both of you have been living and breathing this issue for the last many, many weeks. But Captain Amit Singh, I'm going to take you back to your own report, which is on the screen. What you call the final 12 seconds. Can I go back to the first slide? Could you take me to the first slide of this report? I want to go to the first slide. You call it the plane's automated cry for help. Let's look at each slide individually. What do you mean the plane's automated cry for help? What does this mean?
So the plane is sending out a signal or a message to the ground station that there is a fault. So the fault at critical stages only goes when there is something cascading into a bigger problem. So normally there are smaller faults, but then if there is a big fault, there is an immediate transmission of the message. So that is the message which went across 1 second before the aircraft got airborne at 3.8. That is the MAS. That is the cry for help, that there is a fault in the aircraft and we need help.
What is MAS? I'm going to ask very basic questions because we have to explain this. What is MAS?
MAS is basically a coded word, so that that there is a need for assistance in simple language.
So
assistance is required.
here's my question. Is this interpretative? Like, could someone look at the coded messages coming from the aircraft and interpret them differently from what you have? You have looked at this signals from the ACARS and said it was a cry for help. Could somebody else look at this data and say, no, it doesn't mean that? How do you interpret these coded messages?
So there are certain coded messages which are open, but there are certain messages which are only privileged information of Boeing. So we have a list of messages of faults which appeared after pushback, just when the engines were starting. So those were related to electrical and the electronic flight bag, certain with the hydraulic systems and the flight controls. So these messages are common, and because they have an interpretation in the books, which the pilots have. So next level is there are certain messages which only the engineers can decode, because that is used for their
And this data
troubleshooting.
and these messages would have been looked at later, because I'm assuming every flight in the sky, you're not monitoring the signals coming out of it. This is post the crash that we have this information.
Actually,
This
the
is real
pilots
time
were blind, right?
transmitted
Sorry,
to Air India and Boeing.
I know it's
So
real time,
as-
but is somebody
as it
monitoring
was
it
being
constantly?
played-
Is somebody monitoring it? I know
Yes.
it goes out real time. I know it
Yeah.
goes out real time, but is somebody looking, because there are thousands of planes in the skies. So is somebody looking at the sort of digital signals that are coming from every plane all the time, 24/7?
So there's a hierarchy. So not every message is looked at, and there is a classification of messages. Certain messages are only advisory in nature. Certain, if you go next level, they may be somewhat important, but not critical to the flight. And the others would be high priority, which means critical to the flight. So
Okay.
Boeing need not know everything which happens on the aircraft. They need to know only something critical, which
But
where
even if
intervention is required.
Okay. Before I have more questions, but let's stay on this slide. I think Rachel wanted to come in with a thought, and then I'll come back to you for your next slide. Rachel, go ahead.
So the thing is, when I accessed Boeing internal documents, and just before this call, I was talking to Amit about it. I told him that the pilots were not aware. The cockpit was blind because what happened is there is something called the flight tech printer, and that got MEL'd, which is like marked as a medium risk on June 9, 3 days before the crash. So that's like your backup to your electronic flight bags, and then. The electronic flight bags themselves failed. These were the systems that were informing the pilots. The ACARS communication that was going to the Belleville, Boeing's monitoring hub in the US, and which was going to the Gurgaon office of Air India. These messages were going both to Air India and Boeing, but they were not going to the pilot. The pilot was unaware that these no-go faults are flight critical faults. The plane should have never flown with these faults. And the captain was unaware because the no-go faults appeared at the same time the fault monitoring system itself went down. And the reason the fault monitoring system went down is because there are these fault monitoring computers that are also attached to the core network, which goes back to the fact that Boeing has linked nearly every flight critical system to this core network, but told us that these are non-flight critical functions, and that only like minor functions will be rendered inoperative if this core network is not so Captain Sumit had no idea. The first
So
officer
when
flight
you
leaders had
say
no idea.
the pilots were not aware and the cockpit was blind, and in that sense you draw a parallel with the 737 MAX Lion Air flight, where basically the pilots were blamed for the crash, and it took a second crash of the Ethiopian Airs of the same model for it to be established that it was actually a problem with the MCAS, it was a problem with the software. If you were to draw that analogy, what you're basically saying is that the pilots sitting in the cockpit seconds before this aircraft is to take off have no idea that the aircraft is actually emanating a signal that is indicating that there's a fault. Now, what is this no-go fault? Could you explain that?
So as per regulations, planes are not supposed to fly if they have any one of these faults. So the power control unit I talked about, the BPCU, if even one BPCU faults, they're not supposed to fly. So, and the flight control computers are very critical. So even if one flight control module faults, they're not supposed to fly with it. So the fact is, in this plane, both power controllers failed, left and right, and all three flight control modules failed. So if you see, there have been maintenance logs which show that the previous flight had a stabilizer trim issue, and AIB report only mentions that there is a sensor problem with the stabilizer. It did not mention that the entire stabilizer motor, trim, and sensors and the wiring,
Okay, let's
everything
go
had
slowly. Okay, Rachel, let's go slowly, step by step. Basically, Captain Amit, can you hear me at least? Can you hear me at least?
Yeah.
You can hear me. So let's go to your next slide. You started by saying that in the final 12 seconds, there's a cry for help. Go to the next slide, please. It's an automated MAS. Can I go to the next slide? I need to read the next slide. You need to go back. An automated MAS alert reported a serious system fault needing maintenance. Now, this is something the plane is doing automatically according to you. The pilots have no idea. The cockpit has no idea. I'm assuming it all happens so quickly that the airline and the manufacturer have no idea either, because they're not necessarily looking at these signals. Am I right in assuming that?
No, they had 15 minutes time. They had 15 minutes time.
So then I don't understand why the cockpit would not know. So I want Amit to explain this. If there was a 15-minute window, as Rachel is arguing, Captain Amit, then what happens in these 15 minutes? Because I assume that we're talking about the final 12 seconds where this data is coming, which means the plane is already mid-air.
Yeah, so how these faults occur is individually these faults are low safety events, which means individually they do not affect. But there were, like Rachel said, a couple of faults for which the aircraft should not have departed. But there was a trigger. The trigger started the cascade of electrical events which brought the aircraft down. And the confirmation is the ACARS messages stopped going to the Boeing and Air India Operations Center. So that is the confirmation.
Okay, I'm confused. I'm confused. These final 12 seconds are they're the final 12 seconds before the aircraft goes down. Am I correct, Captain Amit?
Yes, correct.
At which point if the ACARS stops relaying information and it goes silent in the end, and therefore the plane has, I guess, crashed at that point, or something else has gone wrong, what are these 15 minutes that Rachel says did provide a window? Basically, what I'm understanding, and again, I'm going to use very simple language. I'm not a technical person. I'm going to say it as I understand it. What I'm hearing you say is individually, some of these problems by themselves are not considered a high risk factor. So they would not have been looked at as grounds enough for the plane not to take off. But something happened that created either a domino or a snowballing effect, what you called a cascading technical failure. And you are saying that the signals that emanated from the plane in its last few seconds, its final 12 seconds, show you the extent of that system failure. Now, I want to understand how and when this became something that is known, and would it be known to the preliminary investigation panel that wrote a report but did not make any reference to this particular data?
So all this data would have been available to the investigation bureau. The preliminary report should have contained all these faults, since they started when the aircraft pushed back with an intention for taxiing out for takeoff. So these are recorded messages which were shared with everybody, Air India and Boeing. So these certainly would have been recorded and kept in the repository for investigation.
Are you surprised that there was no reference to them in the preliminary investigation report?
I am surprised that even before the report came, the Air India, the Tata's chairman, Mr. Chandrasekhar, gave a clean chit that there was no fault with the aircraft. Because I don't know how he was so confident in saying that, but certainly there was evidence, and there is certain evidence. These last few messages which did not go and no acknowledgement is a confirmation that there was a big technical electrical event which happened on the aircraft.
Well, to be fair, the preliminary investigation report, which all of us have picked different kinds of holes in, one of my problems with it is that it doesn't make a 50-50 scenario even. It doesn't even start with the assumption that this could be a pilot fault and this could be an aircraft fault. It straight away actually says there was no problem with the aircraft, right? And you're saying it would have had access to this very data. Before I understand why, therefore, they would have read it differently.
There's another...
Say, Amit.
Another reason why I say this is because the narrative that Captain Sabharwal cut the fuel control switches cannot be proven because the front black box was recovered. The rear black box was not. The data could not be recovered during the preliminary investigation, and the front one only records the area mic. Area mic is a common mic in the cockpit. It does not differentiate between the captain and the first officer or co-pilot. So you cannot say, unless you have done a voice analysis, whose voice is it? So how could the narrative be built that Captain Sabharwal did it? The rear...
Hang on. What about the cockpit voice recorder?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The front cockpit voice recorder records only the area mic. It does not record individual channels. So how can they differentiate between the captain and the co-pilot? It only records the area mic as a general mic, like you keep a mic and 4 people are speaking. So it records all the voices, but you cannot differentiate who's speaking. Whereas the rear one can differentiate whether the captain is speaking or the co-pilot is speaking. But the rear one was, the data was not recovered from that. So that's why I'm saying the narrative which is being built that Captain Sabharwal did it is totally baseless.
I also want to play out a very short clip of my interview with Captain Sabharwal's father because I think it's two things are pertinent to the investigation, but I'll do that in a moment. Rachel, I want you to explain your 15-minute window because I didn't understand that clearly. Captain Amit Singh, I hope you can hear Rachel. Can you hear her?
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to speak more loudly then if I've not been loud enough. So the reason I am going back to what happened 15 minutes before takeoff is because one of the things that failed was the flight control modules, which is like the flight control computers. They are like the arm of the flight control computers. Why this is very important is in 2016 itself, the FAA warned that these flight control modules can reboot in air. And now this comes to, if they reboot in air, then the logic that they are, logic would be on ground. And if the default logic goes to on ground, then engine computer, which is FedEx, will meet certain conditions under which it can command fuel cutoff. So this is why it is very important we go to that 15 minutes before takeoff, and the AIB should have published this, that the flight control modules were reporting errors because they are responsible for FedEx logic. FedEx takes it, so this is like command flow. FedEx needs the...
So, Captain Amit, I want you to explain this a little more if you can. Do you agree, firstly, with Rachel's assessment that there was a 15-minute window before takeoff and who would have known about it? Or do you feel, as you were explaining, that some individual errors would have not been regarded as high risk?
Yeah, so everything depends on evidence. What evidence do we have on the table? So the evidence, what we have is that there were certain faults and which could have been what we call go or no go. So that needs to be determined. The flight control module, there was a fault in the previous flight and in this flight as well. So it was a continuation. So what effect does that flight control module have when it combines with the BPCO or the electrical faults and the hydraulic faults? So all 3 systems, when they combine and there's a trigger action, so what effect does it have on the safety or the continuation of the flight? That is what Rachel is trying to explain in technical terms. So it is a very complicated. Actually, it is not a simple system or event to explain to a common man. Even to a specialist, it will be very difficult to explain. But it is not unexplainable. So while
I
all
want to
these
play out.
criticalities have been clearly not included in the AIB report, at least the AIB report should have noted that there were certain pre-existing faults and faults which happened during the time the aircraft was taxiing in and during takeoff. whereas they have given a clean chit, no technical recommendations. And like we said, that the ELT did not work, the rear black box got burnt. So it is all could all be related. All these things could be related together.
I want to, before I come back to both of you for some final comments, I want to play out a short clip of a interview, a conversation that Captain Sabharwal's 91-year-old father, had with me. It was a very difficult interview for me to do. The emotion was so high. I never met him. I did not know Captain Sabharwal. There's no personal relationship here, but it was just so tragic to see him. And I'm just going to play out two things that I think are pertinent to the investigation. One is the fact that the probe panel members came to him pretending that, at least overtly suggesting that they'd come only to offer condolences. And in this conversation, then start blaming the son for basically a suicide murder mission, and how, he feels that they had no business to do that. The second is that he has for the first time shared that his son did call him very normally, very routinely, and said, I'll call you from Gatwick, which is where the plane was meant to land, basically suggesting that there was nothing out of the ordinary when it came to Captain Sumit's mental state, at least nothing that the father could see, nothing that anybody else could see. And this becomes relevant because of the sort of whispers about the suicide murder mission. I just want to play out this clip and then I'll come right back to all of you. Take a look.
Two people came to condole.
From the probe panel.
Probe panel. They
Yes.
said that we are the investigators.
Yes.
But while talking and all that, this we are sharing and we are doing this thing and all that. But suddenly, one of them said that he had a suicidal tendency. This had hurt me like hell. I told him that he was a professional pilot and a well experienced, and he knew his job very well,
Yes.
and it is incorrect. I do not know what a man can do in that few seconds, less than 10 seconds, what he did. Because as the profile of the flight, which was shown on TV, I feel it was a balanced flight till lost.
Yeah.
But here the words, there is no thrust and I'm sinking, or something like that, I'm losing height.
Yeah, because we don't have the exact transcript.
So that was visible, and this mayday he has said.
Yes.
And nobody gave them, actually they should give the CVR report, cockpit voice recorder report. Then flight data recorders are there. Everything can come perfectly well.
Yeah.
Why they are hiding? The thing is, why they are hiding it? He was always, before the taking off from Ahmedabad, he told me, normally whenever he was on flight, he'll talk to me for about 2 hours, every 2 hours or 3 hours, just to see that I'm okay, because he was worried that I should be okay. One day he said, Papa, I'm going for the flight and I'll call you from Gatwick.
Yeah.
Very happily and good.
That day?
That day, I said, all the best, beta. Take care of your flight. But that's not the last words with me.
His last words were?
Papa, I am going for the flight and boarding the aircraft. I'll call you from Gatwick.
Very difficult but important. Two important points there, right? A very cogent recollection of the last words, a very routine phone call from a pilot's son to his father, a father who, by the way, has spent some time in the past, in his past life in the DGCA, who actually understands to some degree aviation matters. So I want to come to you first, Rachel. What happens now, given the ACARS sort of interpretation that Captain Amit Singh has put out? Would you be expecting the court, Rachel, I'll start with you before I give Amit the last word, to take cognizance of this, because the court is hearing both Amit and Sumit's father's petitions?
Sure. So, what Captain Sumit's father says is very pertinent, that there was selective disclosure of data, that they weaponized the data. So, he said either release the entire CVR or you should not have released it at all. This is what he said in the petition. And if you see everything, all the evidence so far points to the fact that this plane had a serious electrical cascade, and this plane had a serious electrical cascade within 9 seconds. Because the thing is, if the failure had happened before takeoff, okay, like when he was on the runway, just as he was setting thrust and he was just going down the runway, then he could have aborted the takeoff. When the captain can't abort the takeoff is once they crossed V1 decision speed. So that was 080833 UTC in this plane. And then 9 seconds after that is when the electrical cascade hits, because after that, because the aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed, and after that was your fuel cutoff. So if you see, the only timestamp was like 9 seconds, and in 9 seconds, the only thing that could possibly happen is a systems failure, because anything like a lithium battery ion fire or even multiple other failures, they will all take time. They will take minutes. This flight was only 32 seconds. And also Captain Sumit cannot go to the aft section and like burn up the tail box in the aft section. If you see, the black box in the tail is far more burnt, and there's no visible fire in the plane. You can see in the AIB report that they show that the tail section is intact, and the forward recorder, if you see, it had the it had the impact during the crash and it had a fire. And if you see, another important line in the AIB report, which Captain Amit mentions in his petition, is that the emergency beacon, which is the ELT, never activated in the event. AIB says so. And if you see, they all share proximity. They are very close together in the tail section of this plane. So all the evidence so far, what the AIB has said and what it has not disclosed, because again, they centered the conversation around the black boxes when actually they can release this ACARS code. This ACARS code, Sita, which is Air India subcontractor, supplies this code to both Boeing and Air India, and it is available from the satellite provider Inmarsat. So these technical failures, these failures are huge, very serious flight critical failures, because I've spoken to multiple engineers and some of them off record from Air India, and Air India's engineers say this is very scary, that this plane, how did it have 6 no-go faults? How was it allowed to fly? Because this plane should have never flown. And the reason the pilots and the maintenance didn't know was because the fault monitoring computer also went down at the same time these planes. So it's a serious electrical failure, and every evidence points to the fact that it was not Captain Amit, and it was the system FedEx. It is a FedEx commanded fuel cutoff.
Okay. I want to give Captain Amit Singh the last word. We have seen before with the 787, for example, the Osaka incident, where actually an uncommanded action takes place. Once again, the FedEx appears to have a mind of its own. At least the FedEx has done something that the pilots have not directed or steered. And thankfully, the All Nippon Airways incident ends with no fatalities or injuries or casualties of any kind. Here we are a few years later. This ACARS data, what are we going to do with this now? That, what do you, as a petitioner in the Supreme Court, intend to do with it? Question 1. Question 2, since it hasn't emerged in the preliminary investigation report, I'm sure it has to be, now looked at. Even if it's disputed or disagreed with, it has to be looked at, discussed. Question 3, if there is only an area mic, what does that do to the demand for the cockpit voice recorder or the exact transcript? If you're saying that you can't necessarily know who is saying what. So I want to know where you intend to take this from here. And finally, Rachel has mentioned 6 no-go faults. This 6 no-go faults, is this something you're able to read from the ACARS signals?
So there are these ACARS messages with timestamps available. So AIB cannot refute that these events did not happen. And as far as the petition goes, I have in my petition filed the same ACARS report, that there were pre-existing faults in the aircraft before the aircraft got airborne. And we are awaiting a reply from the government. The government was given 4 weeks to reply. 4 weeks have elapsed, and we still haven't received a reply. Now, since the next hearing is only on 28th of January, we expect them to file a day before. which is the normal practice.
And the 6 no-go faults, do you agree with Rachel's point about the 6 no-go faults? And is that something both of you are reading from this ACARS data?
Well, 6 no-go faults is something which is debatable, but there was certainly 6 faults. And how do you look at those faults from the engineering perspective, from the pilot's perspective, are totally different. From the pilot's perspective, if I see a fault in front of me on the ICAS displayed, I will take necessary action. But like she's saying, there's a fault monitoring computer which monitors all the faults. If that itself is faulty, the pilot will not see any faults. So it is a bit complicated.
Can I simplify? Yes, it's complicated, and without taking anything away from the complexity, I want to just explain what you just said. Basically, you're saying when a plane is cleared or approved for takeoff by engineering or maintenance in any airline, what is a fault and what is a no-go fault is the point here. Rachel is calling it a 6 no-go faults. You are saying there were 6 faults, but somebody may have seen them in isolation, not seen them as no-go faults, and therefore approved the plane. Or they may have seen 1 or 2 of the 6 faults and the other may have followed, which is why you're calling it a cascading effect. So seeing 1 fault or 2 faults, which they may not think impacts the safety of the plane, and hence it is cleared to fly. Am I saying this correctly, Captain Singh?
Yeah, in a way. So there are faults in isolation, but as the aircraft progresses in flight, these faults begin to increase. Like from an individual fault, it becomes a systemic fault. So one whole system gets affected rather than a portion of the system. So that is the complexity is increasing. And then there's a trigger which causes this cascade. So certainly there are faults in the aircraft. And when we look back in hindsight, or when we look at the final report when it comes, then we can say, oh, this should have been done, or that should have been done, or we could have done it differently. But at that moment, what the pilot sees is his decision is based on that, what is shown to the pilot. And in the past, we have seen, like you said, in All Nippon, what happened, the engine shut down uncommanded. There was another event in Australia, but that was a different engine, again uncommanded. So the reason for the uncommanded is not known. And as far as the philosophy of automation goes, the pilot has the final authority. But in this case, the TCMA, which commands this engine shutdown, it overrides the pilot authority. So this is against the philosophy of automation that the Boeing is following.
Okay, we will leave it there. I think this has been a very important conversation. I am certainly not qualified enough to do anything but to listen to both of you very carefully. But what I do want to say in the end is that if this data is there, and clearly it is, you all have spent some time working on it, it should have been referenced in the preliminary investigation report. It should be placed before a community of aviation experts to present their views. And certainly it should be something that comes up as the Supreme Court looks at what should happen next. Is the probe compromised, as so many people have argued it is? Can the probe be redirected or at least supervised by the court, or will there be a fresh probe? We don't know the answers to this. The ball is in the Supreme Court's court, so to speak. But this has been a critically important conversation, and I hope it will start among experts a new conversation, because we cannot let a tragedy of the scale of Air India 171 end forgotten. And I'll just like to end with something that Captain Sumit Sabharwal's father said to me as I was offering him condolences, and I said, "I'm so sorry for your son's death." And he said, "Beta, just remember one thing. This is not about my son. It is not even about the families of the passengers on that plane. What caused the crash is directly linked to the safety and the safety of every single one of us who are part of the flying public." And I think if that's how we see this, we will maybe go deeper into our pursuit for the truth. Thank you to Rachel Chitra, independent journalist, and to Captain Amit Singh, the founder of Safety Matters Foundation and also one of the petitioners in the Supreme Court on the Air India 171 crash. To our audience, thank you for watching. I should say in the end, of course, Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a great evening. Thank you so much.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.